When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Imagine living in a world where the only information you could find was the information you already had. Like a giant echo box for your knowledge. Nothing could be learned, and each day you would become more firmly stuck in the bog of your current beliefs. We all know this hypothetical situation would be bad. In fact, we know that we've been wrong on several occasions, like think of that idiot we dated as a teenager, or perhaps some of our questionable fashion choices over time. Maybe you once invested in a stock that went down. Being blind to new information that tells us that we are wrong is about one of the worst things possible for a growth mindset ever. Yet the brain actually has a default drive to create its own echo box. It finds the idea of trying to accept new beliefs mentally draining, and it prefers to just cherry pick a Google search or a news page for things that it already believes in. And it will do this even in life and death situations. The confirmation bias is really hardwired into us. The Challenger shuttle disaster of 1983 was caused by the confirmation bias. There was clear evidence that the O-ring that failed had trouble in cold conditions, and this was presented to NASA, and they chose to just focus on data and opinions that supported the decision to launch on schedule. This led to all the astronauts on board being killed instantly during the explosion 73 seconds into its flight. And if you think that's bad, confirmation bias even leads to us starting wars. In 2003, the US intelligence had a real lack of actual data confirming that weapons of mass destruction could exist in Iraq, because they didn't, but instead they had a hunch about past behavior, a political agenda, and they used some selective intelligence to decide that there should probably be weapons of mass destruction and that they should legitimately start a war because of that, even though there weren't. So we find that the more that you try to make the facts conform to your current beliefs, the narrower your perspective becomes, until that narrow version of reality that you seek becomes all that you can see. In the modern day, with our unlimited types of content and an algorithm feed that shows you more of what you want, we can become so blind to other viewpoints that we'll feel like people that oppose our beliefs are stark raving mad, and they are just willingly ignoring all the obvious facts that we see, whilst they are seeing a completely different set of data. The flywheel of content echo chambers, where AI is trained to please our biases, is a large part of what is dividing us so strongly. And that's all because of our confirmation bias. Sadly, there is no way to completely eliminate confirmation bias, but you can reduce its effect on you. First, the simple awareness that it exists is very important. And then you have to seek to become an independent thinker. Venture beyond the hive mind of what your group identity thinks, seek information from a variety of sources, and avoid a belief becoming accepted through repetition or political identity or affiliation, or because someone that you respect has that viewpoint. We have all these ways that we just allow data to come into us, instead of actually working out if it's true for ourselves. The art of becoming a deep and rational thinker is the ability to form your own opinions through investigation and avoiding simple biased rules. So good luck with that, and welcome to the show with me, Sam Webster. We are back on cognitive biases, if you hadn't guessed it, and perhaps 7 of the stupidest biases that we have, all based on our perception and decision-making frameworks. It's going to be a really good episode with some of my favorite cognitive flaws, from time discounting to hindsight bias, and we're going to learn how to become a little bit more rational. So stay tuned. Jumping straight into it with the availability heuristic. It is a mental shortcut that's another lazy feature of the brain, where it prioritizes easily accessible information over performing a wider analysis. Imagine that you book a plane at 8:30 a.m. because it's $30 cheaper than a later flight. It's easy to compare the price difference whilst you're on the flight website. Great, you're saving money. But you are ignoring the data that you need about general travel availability and costs to get to the airport. In fact, a flight that's that early might require you to buy a $90 taxi to get to the airport on time, and you've just lost $60 and probably some sleep and increased your stress over the day compared to flying at a later time. But availability heuristic doesn't just affect our purchase behavior, it affects risk analysis and even how we think of ourselves. In one study, participants were asked to provide 6 or 12 examples of when they were assertive. The participants that only gave 6 examples rated themselves as more assertive because they could come up with those 6 examples easily. If you had to come up with 12 examples, that took more mental effort, so the participants kind of gave up and just assumed they weren't very assertive. And the availability heuristic is just all around us with all of the things that come at us. If you hear about a terrorist attack or a hurricane in the news, you weigh this data strongly on how likely things like that will happen. When participants were asked if tornadoes or asthma caused more deaths, people always thought it was tornadoes because they hear about them in the news. Yet, a lot more people die from asthma. It's just kind of common and boring, and so it's not in the news. And this is why we think crime rates are higher than they are, and that we think we have a chance of winning the lottery because we hear about it. If each week we had to read a newspaper with all of the millions and millions of non-lottery winners just to hear about that one lottery winner that was hidden in there, we would probably quickly assume that no one ever wins the lottery and stop playing. So to overcome the availability bias, try to remember all of the data that you aren't being shown and try to visualize it, because we are so visual that we overweigh stories we hear. It's how we learn information. Again, like with the confirmation bias, seek other data sources outside your normal zone and recognize when your brain wants to be lazy. If you feel like you're having difficulty thinking about something like 12 examples of being assertive or visualizing the millions of people that play the lottery their whole life and lose, remember that this difficulty is a sign that your perspective is being bent away from reality, and that actually that's the thing you need to think about rather than the easy thing. I'm not saying it's easy, but that's what you got to do. Now, on a related note, we can move into the neglect of probability. That is the tendency to ignore relevant statistical information when we make decisions. Gamblers can very heavily ignore their losses because a win feels so significant, and they'll focus their imagination all the time on winning rather than imagining how much more time they'll spend losing, because the brain wants to do the easy thing, and that's their fun and success. A really cool example of terrible human comprehension of statistics in general is the jelly bean experiment. Participants needed to pick one red jelly bean, and they were given the option of a bowl where there was 10 beans in which there was one red bean, so they had a 10% chance in this small bowl, and they had another bigger bowl where there were 100 beans, but 7 red beans. So there's a 7% chance in the bigger bowl, which is less than the 10% chance in the smaller bowl. Yet, candidates overwhelmingly preferred the 7% chance to a 10% chance because it felt intuitively like the chances of picking one jelly bean of a potential 7 jelly beans, even though it was surrounded by a lot more others, was a better chance than trying to pick just one jelly bean. Rather, it felt like a better chance than trying to pick the only one jelly bean in that smaller bowl, even though the statistics were kind of obvious that you have a 1 in 10 chance. We just aren't designed to think rationally. And this goes from picking jelly beans all the way up to economic crashes and major disasters like the Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan. It was due to the neglect of probability, where they knew there was a chance of like a 100-year level earthquake happening, but they ignored it as unlikely despite the data in front of them. And it is just the same for the housing bubble and financial crash of 2007 or the COVID-19 pandemic. The statistics were all there, but they were ignored because normal life made people feel like things would just keep working as they were working, and confirmation bias, you just seek to find the data that shows you that you're right. If you've heard of Nicholas Taleb, he has a really great theory about black swan and white swan events. A black swan event is an event that's completely unpredictable, very rare event with a widespread impact, and they'll have an outsized effect on things like the economy and our lives. White swan events, however, are based on known risks and are likely and predictable, despite the fact they still have very significant consequences. And many reporters stated that events like Fukushima or COVID-19 pandemic were black swan events, but they forgot that both events were statistically predicted to happen at some point. The data was there and available in society, and Bill Gates even gave a speech 5 years before the COVID-19 pandemic, predicting that a pandemic would happen, but no one really cared until the actual outbreak. The thing about black swan and white swan events is that it really depends on the observer, as a black swan is an event that surprises you. Imagine that you are a turkey, you have a really good set of historical data that each morning you'll wake up and get fed. Life is easy. Then one morning you wake up and the man that comes in and feeds you every day instead chops off your head and you get turned into a Thanksgiving dinner. That is a black swan event for the turkey, but the farmer knew it was going to happen. And obviously you don't want to be the turkey. It's our job to try and turn black swan events that are unpredictable into white swan events that are predictable, and actually look for the data that might indicate that they could happen at some point. Now, we often can't stop white swan events, like no one was going to be able to stop the housing crisis once it had been built up, but we can be more rational in how we predict them and protect ourselves against their impact. Now, I couldn't be talking all about probabilities and black swan events without mentioning the hindsight bias. We all love hindsight because it gives us the illusion that we can see clearly how obvious something was, and we'll have this innate feeling that whatever happened was more predictable, although we never predicted it. People say things like, "I knew it all along," even though they didn't do anything about it. And an investor who says they knew a market crash was coming yet didn't protect their portfolio is just stupid or delusional, or quite possibly both. In fact, the hindsight bias was coined as the "I knew it all along" effect by psychologists Fishoff and Ruth Bayeth, or Bayeth. I've got it wrong, let's be honest. Ruth, who researched it in the 1970s. They asked people to make predictions about Nixon's visits to China and the Soviet Union. Then afterwards, they asked them about the accuracy of their predictions. And even if the participant made a bad prediction, people always seemed to think that they'd been quite correct in knowing what would happen. In fact, this has even been shown by normal people and doctors who were asked to predict an outcome of a clinical diagnosis. When they later heard the results, they would always view their initial prediction as much closer to what happened eventually, rather than their first prediction. Basically, we just like being right, and we think that we were right even when we weren't. The other day, in fact, I was looking at holidays in Albania with my girlfriend, and it triggered a half memory I'd had from a documentary I'd watched last year, and it caused me to state what I thought was a fact that Dua Lipa was from Albania. But she isn't, and that was really dumb. But I then immediately remembered I was actually meant to say Rita Ora, because she occupies a similar place in my brain to Dua Lipa. No offense if you're a fan of either of them. Now, it turns out Rita Ora is also not from Albania. She's from Kosovo. But I quickly checked a map, and Kosovo is on the border of Albania. And I was like, you know what? I'm basically correct. Sure, I was wrong about the artist and I was wrong about the country, which were the only two facts in question, but basically correct, right? And the mind, it just has a way of feeling correct, even when it isn't. So try to see these things happen in your life and be like, I'm being dumb. I actually didn't get this. Accept them as the fact you're wrong. Actually, one of the reasons why I love investing in stocks and shares is because you have real data showing you were stupid. Because something goes down and you're like, I thought something different would happen, because no one buys a stock expecting it to just go down. But you do, of course, have to accept the fact that you were wrong. I am delighted to recommend my sponsor, Cozy Earth, whose bedding and loungewear I genuinely love. It's made from high quality viscose from bamboo, and it gets softer with every wash. It was voted as Oprah's favorite things several years in a row, and it's because their bed sheets are so damn incredible. Their collection also includes some divine loungewear for your home or travel. They have cute little tote bags to carry your gear anywhere, so whether you are exploring through a journey of personal growth or discovering new parts of the world, you can nestle up under starry skies with the softness of Cozy Earth's loungewear. So pack your bags, venture on, and visit cozyearth.com today and use code GROWTH at checkout for an exclusive 35% off. And let Cozy Earth be your travel companion on the road to adventurous growth. cozyearth.com and use code GROWTH at checkout.
At Evernorth Health Services, we believe costs shouldn't get in the way of life-changing care, and we're doing everything in our power to make it possible. Behavioral health solutions that also keep your projections at their best? It's possible. Pharmacy benefits that benefit your bottom line? It's possible. Complex specialty care that cares about your ROI? It's possible. Because we're already doing it. All while saving businesses billions. That's Wonder made possible. Learn more at evernorth.com/wonder.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
On the topic of hindsight and statistics, and our feeling that we are right when we are wrong, we also have the outcome bias, where we might actually sometimes have been right when we were wrong. And that sounds confusing because it is. The outcome bias is where we judge a decision based on the outcome of it rather than the quality of the decision process. So back to talking about doctors, for example, if a doctor chose a very risky procedure, but it worked out, well, people viewed the doctor as making a great choice. But if it didn't work out, then the doctor was clearly a reckless idiot that shouldn't have been allowed to make choices. And it's the same for managers reviewing a team member's decision. If their action worked out, the manager's super happy, people get away with stupid things. But if someone does a sensible choice, but it actually fails, then people get judged for not being more risky. And we really don't look at the actual statistics of how people weighted their decision with the information in front of them, and if they made what was technically the correct choice for what they could have done given the actual data. Like a poker player should know all of the data and make rational choices to stay in the game. Sometimes risky behavior does play out, but if they constantly take risky behaviors, they're always going to get burned. So you shouldn't overly celebrate taking a risky behavior. For an example from history, Apollo 11 is heralded as one of the best decisions America ever made. But what would we think if it had blown up as it took off 73 seconds into its flight? Which totally could have happened, seeing as even 20 years later that was happening. And I wonder how history would have played out if that had happened. Perhaps they would have halted the moon landing project as something that was much more risky than they should have been doing. Who knows? Anyway, in society, it is very easy to just celebrate risky behavior when we see it paying off. If you ever had a good sports coach, you'll probably know that they reward players that play for the team rather than the ones that just risk losing matches by doing objectively dumb things that are risky. Even when that dumb thing works out, they'll still get told off. But it's just not how we are in society. Society loves a risk-taking entrepreneur. Sure, most entrepreneurs fail, but we'll tell the stories of the ones who were in the right place at the right time, and we'll make them sound like they were geniuses. We have so many other biases going along that a lot of us also think that we should try being an entrepreneur, even though the reality, if we looked at the data, is that most of them just have a very stressful and terrible failure. And on the subject of society's big problems, let's talk about the paradox of choice, which has never been a bigger problem for society than it is now. Having too many options can lead to decision difficulties and unhappiness in our choices. Students that had to choose one of 6 extra credit assignments were much happier with their choice than students who were presented with 30 options. We feel like we want choices, yet actually they make us unhappy. A supermarket survey found that a jam counter with 24 options attracted 50% more people at the counter than when they only had 6 options of jam. But 10 times more people would buy jam if there were only 6 options available, which is absolutely crazy, but it just showed that how much easier it was to make a decision that they felt good about. But in society, for most of our things in life, we don't have 6 options or 24. We have what feels like infinite options. We can swipe forever on Tinder. We can choose from endless different ideas for careers choices or travel destinations. It's so much harder to make a choice that we feel good about. We just have that door in our mind wide open to regret. All those choices just give us this feeling that we need to compare what we're doing to what we could have been doing. And even if you're on holiday having a nice time, you can see people having a different holiday and a nice time. And you're like, oh, I've done the wrong thing. Oh no. Oh, I'm in a queue and there's lots of tourists at this tourist destination, whereas my friend's on this incredible beach having a nice time, where they're actually probably having the same amount of fun as you are. And considering that they're posting it on social media, they're probably not having that much fun because they've got the time to be on social media. Anyway, I'm sure you felt the confusion and delay in picking a movie when you have the infinite confusing list on Netflix, but it's the same thing that's going on for us trying to pick a partner or a career, and it's not healthy and it's not helpful. As humans, we just always want the best that we can get that's out there of our options. But if we can't tell what the hell the best thing is, we feel very uninspired and confused, and we have that weird sense of brain difficulty thing going on, like we've spoken about already in this episode, which is bending us away from reality, where we just need to accept some of the difficulty and start to think more rationally. So spend some less time on dating apps or Pinterest holiday destination ideas and avoid social media, and spend more time creating a list of things that you don't want or don't need to give yourself a more specific decision framework of all the choices that you have out there. And then, like from the Jeff Bezos mental models one, try to just make a decision as quickly as possible with 70% of the information that you'd like to have, and then commit. And now, finally, onto the last of our information processing and decision biases is the concept of time discounting. And this is our desire for rewards in the present, now, over a long-term reward. It's why climate change exists and why people don't save enough money for retirement. We just like to have stuff now. Psychologists found that people preferred getting $50 right now to $100 in 1 year. However, if they changed it a little bit and allowed you to get $50 in 1 year or $100 in 2 years, by making the whole thing a bit more long-term, people were able to think long-term and rationally, and they would choose the $100 over 2 years. So if we can shift our entire mindset to be a bit more long-term, we can start making much more sensible choices for our overall long-term success. It's a weird flaw because, in fact, politics in general is flawed by a focus on the short term. Politicians will stay in power who lower taxes and who don't invest in long-term things that cost people right now. Things like climate change prevention or technology to protect against hypothetical pandemics. People don't want their money being invested in stuff right now for benefits that they don't feel at the moment. You probably heard of the marshmallow test, where a child was given the option of 1 marshmallow now or 2 marshmallows if they could wait for 10 minutes. And they'd follow those kids for the rest of their life and found that the ones that were willing to wait would be much more likely to be successful and healthy people in the long run. Being able to get away from the time discounting flaw and think more long term is a real life skill. Time discounting is at play when we prioritize procrastinating instead of getting work done, or if we put off that gym visit to relax. In fact, addictions like drugs or junk food have a factor in time discounting, where we prioritize gratification over long-term investment in our health and well-being. Again, as we found a few times in this episode, being able to think outside of our current bubble and look at the bigger box of data can be quite hard, but finding a way to visualize what that long-term scenario is can help us overcome our present urges, because we know we do really love a story where we can see what's happening. Of course, also the recency bias is at play, because we can imagine right now the obvious thing for our mind that could happen is the relaxing on the couch versus the going to the gym difficulty. Whereas we have an amorphous blob of something happening in the future, which feels a bit less real, where we actually eventually become fit. Yet, as we've learned, it's often where we have these amorphous blobs of difficulty in our mind, where our mind bends reality away from us, and we need to apply some mental effort to start thinking rationally. Now, of course, the concept of time discounting and fighting against it starts to get into just the general action of forming good habits, where you avoid instant gratification and do things for your long-term benefit. And if you want, I did a deep dive episode on the 10 rules of habit formation according to psychology that is worth a look in. But for now, I hope this episode has given you a bit more clarity on some of the multitudes of dumb stuff that your mind does, and a bit more of what things like hindsight and confirmation bias really mean. If you want to support the podcast, then checking out our advertisers in the description does make a huge difference for us. And currently this month, I am open to calls from anybody on a Wednesday afternoon for this month only. So if you have any questions for me about what you're up to or ideas for the show, then do book a call. I'm actually considering some ideas for making content specifically around psychology for entrepreneurs, and maybe doing something on the general concept of how to change the world. So some feedback on that would always be handy, as also would be the act of leaving a good rating or a comment, which is always very, very much appreciated. So thanks very much if you use your decision frameworks to go and do that. And until next time, please remember that life is too short for living in your own echo chamber or thinking that you are right about everything when you aren't. So search outside of your comfort zone, read some Nicholas Taleb and Black Swan theory, and don't forget to be kind to yourself and smile at strangers.